Welcome to Future², the podcast all about corporate innovation and entrepreneurship. My name is Steve Glaveski, and each week I'll bring you authors, corporate innovation managers, entrepreneurs, and above all else, thought leaders on the topics of innovation, entrepreneurship, and self-improvement. Future² brings you a double dose of innovation inspiration every week to help you successfully navigate your innovation journey. Every Monday, I'll bring you a world-class thought leader such as Steve Blank, Alex Osterwalder, Neil Patel, Rand Fishkin, or Whitney Johnson, just to name a few. While every Friday, I'll bring you some quick, digestible insights myself to help end your week on a high before you head off for the weekend. Future² is proudly brought to you by Collective Campus, an innovation hub, school, and consultancy that works with large organizations to help them adopt the mindset, methodologies, and tools required to explore new business models and disruptive innovation in an era of rapid change. If your organization needs support coming up with ideas, testing and turning those ideas into reality, incubating teams, driving cultural change, or connecting and partnering with startups, then visit Collective Campus online at www.collectivecamp.us. And without further ado, here's today's podcast. Welcome back to Future². Today I'll be speaking with Richard Schmalensee. He is the Howard W. Johnson Professor of Management Emeritus and Professor of Economics Emeritus at MIT. Richard is the author and co-author of 12 books and more than 120 published articles. His research has centered on industrial organization economics and its application to managerial and public policy issues. And he was the 2012 Distinguished Fellow of the Industrial Organization Society. Professor Schmalensee is a Fellow of the Econometric Society and the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. He has served on the Executive Committee of the American Economic Association and has been a Director of the International Securities Exchange and other corporations. He is currently the Director of the International Data Group and National Bureau of Economic Research and is Chairman of the Board of Directors of Resources for the Future. He has just released his 12th book, which is incidentally enough his first in 12 years, and it is called Matchmakers. The book explores the new economics of multi-sided platforms such as Uber and Airbnb. So with that, I bring you the one and only Dick Schmalensee. Welcome to the show, Dick.
Thank you. Pleased to be here.
No, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the program, and as I understand, you're joining us from Brisbane, where you're in town for a conference.
That's right. At the end of a 3-week plus tour of your amazing country.
Wow. And where has this tour taken you?
We started in Melbourne, we went to Adelaide, we went to Alice Springs, to Uluru, to Cairns, to Sydney, and then here.
Oh, wow. So it sounds like you've probably
tried to fit a lot in.
Yeah, it sounds like you've been to more places than most Australians would have been to.
Well, it's an amazing country. I would encourage people to see it all.
Yeah, definitely. Couldn't agree more. Do you have a favorite? Something that you're willing to share on the air?
I thought the variety was amazing. I thought the Great Barrier Reef, snorkeling there was astonishing. The beauty and variety of the corals. Knowing nothing about the Aboriginal history and culture, I found learning a bit interesting. And, you know, I'm a city person, so I enjoyed the cities as well.
Yeah.
So it's been a terrific tour.
Fantastic. And you're normally a resident of Boston, Massachusetts. Would that make you a Red Sox fan?
Inevitably.
Yes. Yeah, fair enough.
And a Patriots fan and a Celtics fan, for those who follow that sort of thing.
Of course. Well, you've got to follow all the big professional teams out of Massachusetts. You can't be following the Yankees or anything like that. That would be sacrilege, I'm sure.
That would be sacrilege and dangerous.
Yes, indeed. Dick, you've recently released your 12th book, and funnily enough, it's your first book in 12 years, so it's a bit of a coincidence there. But what's been keeping you busy in the intervening 12 years? I know you're obviously a professor a professor of economics at MIT. What else has been keeping you busy in the last 12 years? Let's maybe go with the last 2 to 3 years, because I imagine if someone with a resume as colorful and as decorated as yours, if you were to tell us about the whole 12 years, we'd be here for a while.
Well, I appreciate colorful. I need to think about that for just a minute. But I've been, as my wife would put it, unsuccessfully trying to retire.
Yes.
I did this book. I'm chairing a nonprofit in Washington concerned with energy and the environment. Mm-hmm. I'm involved in an MIT project in Malaysia. Where I go to Kuala Lumpur a few times a year, and doing some writing on the side in addition to the book.
Fantastic.
So I'm managing to keep perhaps too busy, but busy enough.
Yeah, no, that's great. I like that. Unsuccessfully trying to retire. I know of an entrepreneur who is now pushing. He'd be pushing 65, and he's saying he's been successfully unemployed for 30 years.
Good on him.
Yeah. Well, your latest book, Dick, it's called Matchmakers, and it was co-authored with fellow economist David Evans. It explores the new economics of multi-sided platforms such as Uber, Airbnb, and just quietly, and please don't share this with the world via iTunes, Tinder. That's one of my favorites. What inspired you to write this book, Dick?
Okay. Well, a couple of things. We've been working on businesses with this model for a long time. I guess David and I started working on payment systems in the early 1990s. Mm-hmm. And then we worked on operating systems in connection with Microsoft later in the decade. We didn't see what our friend Jean Tirole saw, mm-hmm. which was that these are examples of a broader class of businesses. Jean Tirole got the Nobel Prize in 2014 for, among other things, noticing that two-sided businesses are an interesting class. Mm-hmm. But since then, we've studied a number of these businesses, and we felt that we had learned a lot about the theory, and we learned a lot about particular examples, and it sort of made sense to make it into a book. What, in a way, triggered us, we'd read so much about how platforms and platform businesses are going to take over the world, mm-hmm. and everybody should have a platform. And, we know most platform businesses fail.
Yeah.
And it's a very hard business model. Mm-hmm. And we thought, somebody ought to say that. And to try to do a straight-up explication of the basic economics, the mm-hmm. reasons why these businesses can be greatly successful, and the pitfalls, the reasons why and how they could fail.
Yeah, and that's a great take on it, because there are so many people out there who get intoxicated by the promise of building a platform and hitting $1 billion valuation overnight, and it never really pans out that way. And I can vouch from personal experience. I spent a couple of years building out an office sharing platform, and building out the supply side was definitely not a challenge at all. We got it up to about 1,300 locations across Asia Pac, but the demand is a very different story. And I've seen about a dozen other office sharing platforms come and go since then. So why is it so tough to build a marketplace, Dick?
Well, it's difficult. There are really sort of two basic problems. First, the platform connects members of two different groups, mm-hmm. and basically have to be solving a problem that makes it hard for them to connect. Mm-hmm. There are lots of, the example we run with is these business-to-business exchanges that were set up in the U.S. And there were hundreds of them, and they were going to rule the world. Everybody got very excited. But it turned out not to be that hard for buyers and sellers in the U.S. to find each other.
Yeah.
Those exchanges really weren't solving a problem. Mm-hmm. And then the other problem is, the other reason a lot of them fail, a lot of would-be platforms fail, is that you have to get a critical mass.
Yeah.
What you're basically providing to your customers is you're providing access to the other side of the business. So in the case of the business-to-business exchanges, a lot of buyers signed up because, hey, maybe we'll get good prices and know some sellers we didn't know before. But sellers said, wait a minute. We're going to be in competition with more people. Mm-hmm. Buyers will find it easier to compare prices. Mm-hmm. Why is this a good thing for us? So those exchanges got a lot of buyers. They didn't get very many sellers. Mm. And eventually the buyers drifted away because there was nobody on the other side of the business, and they died.
Yeah.
It's often, not always, but it's often easy to figure out one side of the business, mm-hmm. but the other side is hard. There's so many, for instance, payment schemes had these great plans that would make it so attractive for consumers. You'd authenticate using your fingerprint or your iris or, I don't know, your stride. And consumers said, that would be great. And merchants said, let me see, that would require new equipment. What's the payoff from the new equipment?
Yeah.
Why do we want this again? And those have died. So the two things, you got to solve a real problem, and you've got to have a strategy for getting enough participants on both sides or all sides to make it interesting.
Yeah.
And that's hard. That's hard.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the stats are, well, in Australia, at least 96% of startups fail to become sustainable businesses. And oftentimes it's because they're not solving a genuine problem. And I like what you've touched on there with sometimes it's easier to build the demand. Sometimes it may be easier to build the supply. And, is it a buyer's market or a seller's market? When I was trying to build out the office sharing platform, vacancy rates in offices at the time were quite high. And people were quite willing to list their space. But in times when it's a seller's market, why would you put yourself out there and increase transparency and, I suppose increase pressure on prices dropping and whatnot? So it's an interesting one. Yeah,
it is interesting. And again, the question is, how hard is it to find temporary space if you're looking for an office? And, how hard is it to advertise your space with a plain old-fashioned agent if you're looking to rent your office? So, you were solving a problem, I think, but not a big enough problem.
Well, yeah.
Until you get critical mass, doesn't matter.
Clearly, exactly.
So many businesses that would be terrific if they had lots of people on both sides. And they die because they never get there.
Well, that's right. And, when I was talking about the 96%, it's hard enough to get a one-sided business, B2B business, to succeed, let alone one where you've got two sides and you've got essentially two value propositions and two customer segments, and your messaging and your brand and everything needs to speak to everybody. It can't just speak to one side of the equation.
And we always focus on the winners. We use OpenTable as I guess our running example for a number of reasons. But OpenTable, the sort of online restaurant reservation system, very successful. Sold a few years ago for about $2.4 billion, as I recall. But it wasn't the only business that had that idea. A lot of people said, gee, wouldn't it be great if we had a lot of restaurants signed up and a lot of consumers using the system? We could make a lot of money. Well, a lot of people tried, and OpenTable survived. There were a lot of social networks, and Facebook survived. A lot of video sharing services, and YouTube survived. If you don't get it right at the start, you're not going to surf.
Yeah. So on that, Dick, what were the commonalities between OpenTable and Facebook and so on that set them apart from the rest of the pack?
It really was their ability to get critical mass to launch.
Right.
OpenTable, they did one thing right, then they did one thing wrong, then they finally figured it out. The one thing they did right was they said, well, we have to get restaurants connected. And without restaurants, we've got nothing. And most restaurants didn't at that time have computers. So they built a software product that enabled restaurants to do table management and to keep track of their good customers. And they leased it to them, and they leased along with it an internet connection. Then they had the great idea, well, let's sign up a lot of restaurants all around the country, which they did. And that was a bad strategy because they had thousands of restaurants all around the U.S., but in any one location they had only a few. So they went to consumers and they said, hey, you people in Chicago, we got 20 restaurants online. And people in Chicago said, who cares?
Yeah.
So they finally, after burning through a lot of money, they finally said, all right, let's get a lot of restaurants in San Francisco. Then let's advertise to consumers in San Francisco.
Yeah.
And then we'll do the same thing in Chicago. And then we can go to other cities and say, look at the traffic we have in Chicago and San Francisco. Restaurants sign up, consumers sign up. and then off we went. Facebook, I don't understand it, or YouTube rather, I don't understand it quite as well, because a lot of people saw the technology. I think, I hate to say this because they're undoubtedly geniuses, but I think some of it was luck.
Oh, yeah.
Because they bounced along with almost no uploads, no views, nothing for a long time, and then a few videos seemed to have caught on, and then they exploded.
Yeah.
Once people said, gee, there's an audience, I'll upload my cat video. And then once other people said, boy, there's this neat stuff up there, I'll go look again. It was classic.
Yeah.
It was a classic two-sided business explosion.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I'm a big believer that luck is essentially hard work plus timing. Sometimes you've just got to be right place, right time. Market conditions have got to be favorable, and so on. But I like what you said there about.
I think also. Well, sorry.
No, go on.
I think you also have to sort of get the rest of the model right. I mean, for instance, there were a whole lot of payment products launched in the 50s. People were tired of paying card fees to a Visa and MasterCard and American Express, and hotels had this great idea. Instead of having us pay to run this, to maintain the system, why don't we have consumers pay? Visa, MasterCard, American Express all have merchants basically paying the freight. Let's set up a system with a different model.
Yeah.
Well, they all failed. They all failed. OpenTable had the right pricing model, which is the restaurant pays, the consumer gets rewards, and then some others. The other example that I think is instructive, is Facebook versus MySpace. MySpace took off, big audience, didn't control who did what on the site.
Yeah.
So people posted all kinds of stuff. People operated under assumed names. Facebook spent a lot of time on governance. You can't use assumed names. You can't post inappropriate things. There's people watching, monitoring activity constantly. And folks just moved away from MySpace.
Yeah.
So, MySpace had critical mass. They had launched. They were looking good. And they blew the execution. Boy, you can blow the execution of any business at any stage.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's something that most startups overlook. They think just because they've got a value proposition of some kind that's it. But they've got to get the business model right, whether it's price, revenue model, distribution channel, marketing channel. And then, even within price alone, there's so many options. It could be freemium, value-based, market-based, cost plus. There's so many different options. And you could have the best idea in the world, the smartest team, get everything right, and maybe you just chose the wrong pricing model, and that could be lights out.
That's right. Particularly if you're trying to do something really new, you really have to be flexible because, nobody's really smart enough to know how to be sure they have the right pricing model at the start. They got to see what the market is telling them. And if it's the wrong pricing model or the wrong launch strategy, you have to be quick on your feet.
Yeah.
Some businesses, this looks a lot, a magazine is a magazine is a magazine, so you sort of know what that looks like. If you're doing something new, like your office rental site, you really have to be pretty alert to who is going to pay for this. What's my marketing channel, as you say? Am I going to hook up an advertising link to this, or some other way to monetize? If there isn't an obvious model, you have to be flexible and inventive because you will be surprised, almost certainly.
Yeah, couldn't agree more on that one, Dick. And I also like what you said about OpenTable and how they had restaurants all over the country to start with. But as a local user, it wasn't simply enough for me to go onto their website and see that there was 20 restaurants. It's nowhere near compelling enough. And it's funny, within the startup ecosystem, you have people who say, think big, go for that unicorn valuation. But that's all well and good. But initially, you've got to prove the model. And as a startup with a limited runway, the only way you're going to do that is by doubling down on a particular segment in a particular market. And Facebook was no different. They started out at Harvard and then branched out to a few other Ivy League schools and eventually took over the world. But it did start in a very small pool.
It started in a small pool. It started with a particular design, which is quality postings. So, everybody, it was a Facebook. It was everybody with a real name and a real picture and real credentials. And that turned out to be a good design, and they stuck with it. The other thing about Open Table and about a number of startups who want to be unicorns, it's a sort of echo of the burial.com mantra of get all the eyeballs, get all the eyeballs, get all the eyeballs. The notion is if you get a big audience, you'll get rich. Well, Open Table got a lot of restaurants, but it was the wrong mix. We're lucky to have very patient investors. Most startups don't.
Yeah, exactly. And Twitter's a great case study of lots of eyeballs, but now investors are all asking questions, and it's had these ridiculously large price to earnings valuations for a very long time. And a lot of people are writing the early obituary for platforms like Twitter, which is interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's the classic model, which is get a lot of eyeballs and then sell the eyeballs. But it's not clear that they're sticky enough. I've never been a Twitter user because I've never thought I had something I could say in 140 characters that would be interesting to anybody.
It's funny you should mention that, Dick, because I actually while I was researching you, I looked for your Twitter profile, and I noticed you had one solitary tweet from 2013 which said, "Just signed up, can't wait to receive wisdom in small doses and try to dispense some." That was the end of Dick Schmalensee online.
That was the end of it, Yeah, every so often, I read something in the paper and I think, I would tweet on this. And then I think, I can't do that in 140 characters. Now, my co-author, David Evans, tweets reasonably regularly.
Fair enough.
And what our publisher said, if it's natural for you, it'll help the book sell. If it's not natural, it'll look stupid.
Okay, so
I thought, one additional way I could look stupid, I think I'll pass on this one.
Fair enough. Well, so what you're saying there is when I'm reaching out to get either yourself or Dick to share this podcast, once we're done, I'll be reaching out to Dave to share it.
Yeah, absolutely. No, David will tweet.
Fantastic.
And he has a lot of followers, I expect.
Yep, beautiful. So Richard, I know KPMG built a platform called Marketplace a couple of years ago, and essentially it was supposed to pit underutilized talent with employers on a short-term basis, but didn't really receive much traction, and that's for a number of reasons. But to that point, we've mentioned that one, you need to get critical mass. You need to be solving a problem. Perhaps you need to double down on a particular area, make sure you get the model right. Are there any other key takeaway or lessons for people or companies looking to build a marketplace that you uncovered in your research?
Yeah, I think there are a bunch of them, but I think you're pointing to the most important. I guess I would add a couple that apply to other businesses as well, but you don't want to overlook them.
Yeah.
Which is really think hard about the ecosystem.
Sure.
I mean, who are the folks who can make your product more valuable? In the case of mobile, say, it's app developers, and you want to cultivate those folks. They provide complements. If you could make it easy for them to make your product more valuable, as both Apple and Android have done well, then that's terrific. The other thing, again, it applies to all businesses, but particularly to platforms, think hard about who your competition is. Because in the case of platform businesses, your competition may not look like you. It may come out of left field. It may be another platform. It may be a single-sided entity. Who's to say? I mean, newspapers have been a classic platform business for hundreds of years. They got blindsided by, I think Craigslist operates in Australia.
Yes.
It basically took away their want-ad business, at least in the U.S. almost entirely. They're not a newspaper. They don't look anything like newspapers. They surfaced online and bang, the business is gone. So it particularly as technology moves forward, and really is technology that's enabled this model to take off, because technology has really made it easier to connect than ever before, and these businesses are about connections. As technology moves, it enables new forms of competition. So if you're starting one of these things, great. Watch your backside, because somebody else will have another great idea with another new technology.
Yeah.
I don't know who's going to come after Uber and Lyft, but somebody will.
Well, yeah, it's funny you should mention that. I'm a big reader or avid blockchain follower, and we have discussed that topic on this show a few times before. And I mean, if the blockchain was to take off, essentially it could support a real sharing economy where you haven't got the middleman, and essentially you have a blockchain Airbnb or a blockchain Uber where underutilized assets are just matched. And that's an interesting one, because there's been a few economists have basically been saying that Uber and Airbnb aren't really sharing economy companies. I mean, they essentially amount to service aggregators, and they charge you for their service, right? So if we're really sharing something, we're not charging each other for it.
Well, now we're in definitions, but I would say my co-author David has written extensively about blockchain, and it's worth reading. You can catch it on his website. He's a bit of a skeptic, and he's a bit of a skeptic because these are two-sided businesses, and they kind of neglect the need to pay the miners. Right? Most of these models just assume that you can run off the existing infrastructure, which is a little dicey, and if not, then you've got to set up your own, and that model depends extensively on people doing the mining. So the question is, how are you sure that's going to happen? So this is not my stuff; it's his. I would recommend it. I've read it. It's thoughtful. It's a bit of a corrective to people who say, blockchain technology will rule the world. And he's looking at it closely as a two-sided proposition, and says you got to have the miners. Where do they get paid? And so not to be a skeptic, but no. I think it deserves a hard look.
Oh yeah, look, definitely. And there's so many different platforms coming out now. Obviously, Bitcoin is still the biggest, and I mean, it's an interesting one. And I don't purport to be an expert on the topic, but I do know that there are thousands upon thousands of miners out there setting up elaborate servers and whatnot to just constantly mine Bitcoin. And sometimes they've got a dungeon set up under their home. So there must be some incentive for them to be doing that at the moment. Whether or not that incentive is sustainable,
there is.
Yeah.
Will it continue?
Yes.
And will it scale?
Yes, that is the question. That is definitely the question. And of course, there's other models out there. The Ethereum platforms and your Ripple platforms, which have a slightly different infrastructure or architecture underpinning them. But definitely a valid question, and I look forward to digging into Dave's stuff, because you've got to inform yourself of every possible argument and different sides of the story, I think, with anything. So definitely look forward into digging into that. One of the other areas I wanted to discuss, Dick, was about regulation. And, when it comes to today's regulation, a lot of it dates back, to the 19th and early 20th century, essentially during the Industrial Revolution. In some cases, we've got places like New York State where money transmission laws date back to the 19th century, when money was moved by horse and buggy, which is kind of crazy when you put it. So, what are your thoughts about how marketplaces navigate these challenges? And, we've already seen Uber and Airbnb deal with their fair share of litigation and whatnot. So it's keen to hear your thoughts.
Well, I think there are a couple of points to be made. First, some of these new models like Uber, Airbnb, Lyft go right at regulated entities, and there will be friction. It's interesting. Uber has had a major impact on the taxi industry in Boston. And the taxi industry is now saying, wait a minute, you've been regulating us. And we've been putting up with it because we've been earning decent returns.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't regulate them. You're regulating us. You got to relax the regulation on us rather than you have to regulate them. You have to deregulate us.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the hotel's reaction to Airbnb is sort of, well, they need to pay taxes. I think that, are they going to win that? Or is Airbnb going to win and the hotels will finally say, look, you can't tax us. We can't compete. We'll shut down. So I think everywhere old models come under threat, there is a defensive reaction to try to regulate the new and slow them down. And that's just always going to happen. The other thing that's interesting, though, and is a little different, you begin to have questions, and I've heard this from competition authorities in a couple of countries now. They begin to say, wait a minute, if these things are natural monopolies, if, for instance, Uber is going to be the only ride-sharing company, do we need to treat it like a public utility?
Yeah.
Should it be regulated? What about these online travel sites? They're being investigated in Australia, in Europe, and I think in the U.S. Because there aren't that many of them, and they kind of have agreements. My own preference would be to attack the agreements rather than try to regulate prices. But they get to be, these businesses are getting to be big enough and important enough in some cases that you're getting the kind of attention, the kind of regulatory attention that very big businesses with market power traditionally get. And that's also natural. You hope that regulators and competition authorities have the sense to understand these models and their limits and their strengths and their weaknesses before they go treating them like they're buggy manufacturers. And I think there's some evidence that that's happening. I gave a seminar at the ACCC competition people earlier this week talking about multi-sided platforms and some of the implications for competition policy of this business. But, they're going to come under the kind of scrutiny that they haven't before. I did some work for Microsoft years ago, and I can remember this was some of their first antitrust problems. And I remember Bill Gates saying, "I don't understand this. We're just a software company sitting out here in Seattle. Why are we getting trouble from Washington?" Well, there is going to be trouble. When you get to be big and important, there is going to be trouble, even if you have only 20 employees. You are going to have to sort of be an adult and face the music.
Yeah, exactly. And, whenever there are winners or new winners, there are going to be losers. And it's an interesting phenomenon, I guess, where you have companies like Uber who essentially help to centralize wealth in a very small part of Northern California. Companies like Uber, obviously Netflix, Airbnb, and they don't pay their drivers, or in Uber's case, they don't pay their drivers employee benefits, or they don't take care of their social safety net. So suddenly what happens is what was the domain of employers becomes now, it basically increases the pressure on government then to take care of people's basic needs. And that's a whole different question. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Is that something where, as a big behemoth organization, no longer just a software company in the valley, do you have an obligation to take care of your people?
Well, I think what a number of people have said, I'm not really a labor employment guy, but I'm sympathetic to the notion that in the past, we've sort of had two kinds of workers. There's the employee, and you treat them one way, you withhold income tax, and you do this, and you have to give them benefits. And then there is the purely at-will, shows up, gets paid for a job, and goes home, independent contractor. The proposition people are advancing is that folks like Uber drivers or others in what they call the gig economy are in between the traditional employee and the at-will, shows up for a job worker, and there ought to be some intermediate status. If you work more than 10 hours a month for these people, yeah, you're not really an employee because you may be working for 5 other people, but you need to be treated somehow in between. Not like you're just a guy who wandered in off the street, but also not like you're a full-time employee. I don't have the answer, and I think people in various countries are groping toward some sort of answer.
Yeah.
But it makes sense to me that, you're neither fish nor fowl in these cases, and we need to find a way to characterize this. I don't have the answer, but I think it's a good question.
Yeah.
That's, new technology, new business models tend to raise new questions, new public policy questions, and I think this is one of them.
Yeah, couldn't agree more there, Dick. So I think that brings to a close our questions on marketplaces and the sharing economy. But I did want to get into what I do with all of my guests. It's 3 questions. I call it our lightning round. Are you ready, Dick?
Ready as I'll ever be.
Fantastic. Okay, so question number 1 is, if you could work for any company at any stage of the company life cycle, who would it be and why?
Oh, just because I've seen it in an early stage. I would love to have worked for Microsoft early on. Yeah, I mean, Bill Gates, think about Bill Gates' life. He had this dream. I want a computer on every desk. And he did it.
Yeah.
He did it.
Yeah.
And, of course, he made a lot of billionaires in the process. So it would have been exciting, and I'd be really rich.
Yeah, well, that's the nice kicker at the end there. And there's definitely very few companies who had this one solitary visionary leader who has had as much impact as Microsoft has. I mean, right now I'm looking at a Microsoft Word logo on my screen, and not on my desk. I've got a MacBook, but my colleague next door to me has a Microsoft Surface on their desk. So there you go. I mean, it's incredible the reach and impact that Microsoft has had in essentially a short amount of time, really.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I don't think they were a public company until, was it 1986? Maybe.
Yeah.
They were writing assemblers in a motel room in Albuquerque, and then.
Boom.
And then they did it.
Yep, definitely.
So that would have been really exciting.
Yep, yeah, it's a great answer. It's actually the first time anyone said Microsoft, so you're in a league of your own there, Dick. Next question is...
Well, that's why I said early. I think they've become bureaucratic in the last few years.
Yeah.
The flame has to some extent gone out after Bill. But boy, those early years must have been really exciting.
Oh, yeah. I think any company, any small company, once they start to hit traction and start to have a massive impact, that's just like riding a wave. You just get into flow and just, hold on to your seat kind of stuff. So, yeah, absolutely couldn't agree more on that one. The next question, Dick, is if you could ask anyone a question, dead or alive, who would it be and what would you ask?
Oh, wow. It probably wouldn't be a business person or an economist. I'd have to think it would probably be a political leader, it would probably be a "what were you thinking" kind of question.
Right.
Maybe when Abraham Lincoln sat down to free the slaves. I would love to have asked, how did you get to this point? There have been a lot of speculations, but I'd like to know from him how he got to that point. And I could think of others. Maybe I'd like to think of a question that would be worthy of Einstein, but I don't think I could think of one that he wouldn't find boring. But I'd love to have the conversation. But I think a kind of a how did you get to this point? A conversation, a question put to an inspiring leader. Yeah.
Well, everybody likes stories, and it'd be interesting to hear, like you said, how we got to that point. And it seems to be a common answer, or people from that era. Essentially the formation of the United States that we know today, whether it was Abraham Lincoln or the presidents that came quite a bit earlier, your Jeffersons of the world. That would be definitely an interesting conversation. And finally,
I don't know why Jefferson hated banks.
Yeah.
I don't know why Jefferson hated banks so much, because that was disruptive. But anyway.
Yep. All good, Dick. So finally, the last question is, it's about performance and lifestyle design. And obviously, you've written 12 books. You're a professor at MIT. You're currently in Australia on a speaking tour and running workshops and seminars and doing all sorts of good stuff. So do you have any rituals or routines that help you stay on top of your game?
It's critical for me. You can't do it when you're traveling like this, but I often try to, at least I haven't been able to on this trip, is to exercise regularly and intensively.
Mm-hmm.
I can't just do intellectual work.
Yeah.
I need a break, and the best kind of break I find is something that is hard to do, that I can focus on. I like to ski, because when you're skiing, you're really focused on your skiing.
Yeah.
Play tennis. Well, at least when I'm on my game, I focus on it. Or just go to the gym and work hard. If I don't do that, I just get stale.
Yeah.
That really does help me stay focused.
Yeah, and that's a great answer, and I'm a massive believer in that too, especially when traveling for work. At the very least, getting up an hour earlier and just going for a run. And it's also a great way to explore a new city if you've never been there before.
Absolutely. I don't run as much as I used to, I have to admit, but I certainly have done plenty of running around new cities and getting lost in creative ways.
Yeah, pounding the pavement.
It's all good.
Yeah. And I like what you said there as well about being super focused. And essentially when you're skiing, you're in flow and you're out of your head. That the whole monkey mind thing, you get to just focus on one thing rather than at times hundreds of things which may be buzzing around in our heads.
Yeah, focus on one thing. Then when that's over, the mind is clearer, I find.
Yes, couldn't agree more. Okay, Dick, so obviously people can head to Amazon to pick up a copy of Matchmakers. Where can they go to find out a little bit more about you?
Well, my website, there aren't too many Schmalensees.
Uh-huh.
So my wife and I each have websites, and if you just Google Schmalensee, you will find my website at MIT, which has a lot of information. Mm-hmm. There's also a Matchmakers website that has a lot about the book and reviews and related articles. Mm-hmm. I'm at MIT. I'll be in Kuala Lumpur in September, giving a talk about this book. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure where's after that, but I'll be around. Fantastic.
And Schmalensee, where is that from?
That's German. It means a narrow lake.
Oh, wow. Excellent. My surname, I have absolutely no idea what it means, but that's a whole different story. Okay, Dick, well, thank you so much for giving up some time. You've been an excellent guest, and I think left our audience with some food for thought, which is always good.
Oh, it's been a pleasure, and I appreciate it.
Enjoy the rest of your stay.
I shall.
Well, that's it for my chat with Dick Schmalensee. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. And FYI, I am actually writing another book. So this is a follow-up to my first book, The Innovation Manager's Handbook. And I'm not quite sure which topic to write it on. So I've got a short list of topics. There's 5, in fact, which I would love you to vote on. So I'm taking the Ash Maurya approach to writing a book here, completely lean, starting with having my audience select the topic, having my audience select the table of contents thereafter, and following that, I'll be drip feeding a chapter of the book every 2 to 3 weeks for feedback and iteration from there. So over the period of about 4 to 6 months, I'm hoping to have a book completed. And for all of my followers who support me throughout this process, you'll no doubt get a hard copy of the book once this is complete. So if you've got a moment, I would love it if you would head to bit.ly/Steve's book topic, and you can vote there between 5 different options, and I would really, really appreciate that. As always, if you're picking up what we're putting down, if you would like us to continue bringing you a high caliber of guests, then it's absolutely critical that more people are listening to this show. And you can help us achieve that objective simply by taking a minute to like, share, or subscribe, or perhaps do all 3 to this podcast on iTunes, SoundCloud, or Stitcher. And finally, if you'd like to find out a little bit more about Collective Campus, our innovation school, hub, and consultancy based here in Melbourne, Australia, you can do so at collectivecamp.us, where you can also access a heap of blogs, podcasts, videos, webinars, infographics, and so on. So that's at collectivecamp.us. Until next time, thanks for listening. Future² out.